Welcome in to the 48 Minutes podcast on Believe. I'm Ross Geiger, the former NBA video coordinator, and I'm joined alongside Bruce Bernstein, our four-time Emmy Award winner who spent more than 3 decades at ESPN producing NBA shows, SportsCenter, and soaking up knowledge from the best hoop analysts in the business. Also joining us is the 2-time Emmy Award winner, Michael Willoughby-Freer, who's a senior writer at Stat Factor, specializing in writing advanced statistical NBA reports for various announcers across the league. This is episode number 251, the Mohamed Diarra episode, as the small forward out of France currently wears number 51 as a member of the New York Knicks, a team that is headed to the 2026 NBA Finals. And guys, speaking of France, his Knicks will be facing another fellow Frenchman, Victor Wembanyama. So that should be a fun little matchup there between those two guys in this biggest series of the season. So before we get into this year's NBA Finals preview right here on 48 Minutes, we've got to discuss the aftermath of the Thunder Spurs series, especially given the fact the last time we recorded, Game 4 had just happened, and we were awaiting Game 5, Game 6, and Game 7. So OKC had a strong response in that Game 5, winning 127-114 to gain that 3-2 advantage in the best-of-7 series. But then the Spurs showed their will and found their way, winning both games in 6. Bruce, I'll start with you. What did you think of those last 3 games of the Western Conference Finals?
Well, it's funny. Even though they lost Game 5, I saw something good in that loss for San Antonio, and that was basically that Julian Champagnie started making threes. He made 4 in that game, took 8, made 4. That was a really good sign, and even Stephon Castle was better. He made 3 out of 5. So those, seeing Champagnie come out of his funk a little bit, I thought, boded well for the next games. And then when we got to the 6th game, that 20-0 run in the third quarter that blew things open, that was really the guards who did it. Out of those 20 points, Harper had 6, Fox and Castle had 5 each. So out of those 20 points in that 20-0 run, 16 of them came from those 3 guys. Wemby had 1 bucket and Champagnie had the other one, I believe. So when they blew OKC away in that third quarter with Wemby barely playing a role, I think that kind of left a little bit of a mark on OKC. It showed the basketball world that the Spurs, were much more than just Wemby and a bunch of guys. And well, then Game 7, I mean, geez, that was the type of blood and guts win on the road that forges a team's identity. I said before, God has got to be a Spurs fan for the team to have David Robinson, Tim Duncan, and now Victor Wembanyama. And then perhaps the basketball gods were also working in their favor and didn't want to see OKC repeat because basketball gods took Jalen Williams off the court when he was needed the most. So had Jalen Williams played, I think we might be having a much different conversation, heading into the finals. But you know what? Chet Holmgren, I guess, pissed off the wrong guy. I mean, Wemby decided at some point he didn't like him, and he went out of his way to kind of humiliate him time after time after time. And, it was one of the lamest, most scared performances in any Game 7 ever by an all-star. So I would say, it's funny. Last week, Chet was, riding high. Now it's like, gee, maybe they should call Milwaukee and see if they can put a package together to get Giannis. Send Chet and a bunch of those assets that they've been stockpiling in OKC. Because, I mean, if they're going to have to go up against OKC in the playoffs every year, I'm not sure that Chet's up to that challenge.
No, he just exposed them on the biggest and brightest stage, and that one's going to hang with them for quite a while. That's going to be the narrative moving forward until proven otherwise. Worldby, what's your thoughts on how this series played out?
Well, I think we were reminded just how good we hear how great Oklahoma City's defense was all season. It was the best in the league, and Detroit had one of the best defenses in the league. But we were reminded just how good the Spurs are defensively. I mean, Game 6, when they had to get the win, they held OKC to 91 points per 100 possessions, which wasn't even the lowest defensive efficiency they had in this series. Remember Game 4, they held them to the worst game of the season for OKC, just 80 points per 100 possessions. Then you come back in Game 7 in the biggest game of all, and you hold, again, one of the best offenses under 110 points per 100 possession. It just really reminded you just how great these guys are. I know Wemby gets all the pub, and it's all worthwhile, but the defense for the Spurs was really impressive in the 2 games they needed. By the way, think about this. What a back and forth series. They took the early series lead 1-0 with that Game 1 win, fell behind 2-1, fell behind 3-2, and kept battling back when they were backward to the wall. Something to think about going forward if they get in that spot, coming up in the finals, not to, just write them off if they fall behind a little bit, because they clearly have found a way to respond, and they do it defensively, which is going to be a real challenge for the Knicks coming up, playing a team that good defensively.
Yeah, no question about it. And I kind of want to circle back to what Bruce had pointed out with some of the players that played major factors in how this series ended up playing out. And that's my yay and nay of this series. The yay, of course, is Julian Champagnie, who averaged nearly 12 points a game, over 6 boards, which I think is super important for this group, especially when Wemby is out on the perimeter a little bit more. Obviously, not as aggressive, maybe trying not to pick up an early first half foul, jumping over somebody's back for a board. Julian Champagnie is there to help out in that regard. Over 1.5 assists a game and over a steal per game in the 7 games for Julian Champagnie in the Western Conference Finals. Let me remind you, Champagnie is a guy that at one point in time was waived by the 76ers in order for them to sign Mac McClung. So, I mean, the fact that he went from that to playing a significant role, 30-plus minutes a night here in the Western Conference Finals, quite a journey and development story for him. And he absolutely put the nail in the coffin for OKC in Game 7 with his long-range shooting, dropping 20 points, 6 of 10 from downtown. I mean, that, to me, was a huge separate in this one.
I consider him to be the Spurs X factor against the Knicks. I mean, here you have a St. John's guy who graduated from high school in Brooklyn. So he's a New York guy, right? And he came alive in those last 3 games of the OKC series. And it always seemed, it's weird. It seemed that whenever he hit a 3-pointer, it was a really painful bucket for OKC. Yeah. It was like very meaningful, hits when he would, make those 3-pointers. It wasn't like if Devin Vassell made a 3-pointer. It's like, okay, he makes a bunch of 3, but it seemed that whenever Champagnie hit one, it was like a punch to the gut.
Yeah, like a Robert Horry-esque type a 3-pointer from his glory days in big playoff spots.
Hey, before we move on, can we circle back to one thing from Game 7? Because I know it's something that I will never forget, and you guys probably won't either.
Yeah, let's hear it.
The unicornet, that block, that was right there with Tayshaun Prince on Reggie Miller back in the 2004 Eastern Finals and LeBron James on Andre Iguodala in the 2016 Finals. And here's a little side note. Harrison Barnes was on the court for the Warriors when LeBron snuffed Iggy's shot. And, of course, now he's Cornette's teammate in San Antonio. That one was like, you couldn't have been happier for a guy than what Luke did in that moment. And I mean, I know you guys are very good friends, and we all kind of feel a kinship towards him because, he's a friend of the show and also a former Celtic, got a ring there. So I just was like, I felt like one of my relatives did something to make me proud.
Yeah, no, that was an awesome moment there for the Unicornet. And I'll tell you what will be, I know obviously your dreams will be shattered if the Knicks don't get it done this year, having made the finals. But should your Knicks lose, one good part of that is the fact I will get Luke Cornett to come back on the show because, hey, he told us all about the parade in Boston. If he wins in San Antonio, we got to have him on post-parade in San Antonio and do a repeat of the show. So at least that'd be a full circuit moment. World B, I know that's not the consolation prize you're looking for, but at least there would be like a pro.
I can be a pro here when it counts. I can, I can be objective when it counts. I don't think there's any problem there. I think I know what I'm doing as far as that goes. But no, it'd be great to have him on. He was a great guest to have on a couple years ago when he came on and talked about the boat ride and all that. So now they get to, you can go down the river and the river walk there and give a comparison which body of water works out better for celebration. But one thing we talk about with the Spurs, we were talking about the yays and nays, the unsung hero. Don't discount the impact that De'Aaron Fox had on keeping this team together. I talked about last week, the first 2 games of this series when he was out, they were just a turnover city, 44 turnovers combined in the first 2 games. He plays the last 5 games, and the Spurs only average 13.5 turnovers a game. That's huge for them. You go from 22 a game down to less than 14. You really, all those. Plus, when you got a guy like Wemby to put the ball in the basket, when you give him possessions where you're not turning it over, that's huge. So, if I had a yay guy that went beyond the usual suspects, he'd be my guy there, because the offense really improved the minute he was healthy enough to get on the court.
Yeah, great point, World B. Now, can we talk about the nay real quick here? Because I think we have to dwell a little bit more on Chet Holmgren here, because this guy averaged 10.7 points in the series, 7.1 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 block. That's all fine and dandy. Not the greatest stats, not the worst. But he absolutely no-showed Game 7, taking just 2 shots for a combined total of 4 points in the game, grabbing just 4 rebounds. And, fellas, Holmgren didn't even attempt a single shot in the second half. Now, I know they're not running plays for the guy, but to not be aggressive at all, show a will to want that game, you got to do more. This is a guy who's supposed to be part of OKC's Big Three. We were just talking last summer about how he signed a 5-year, $239 million extension. 4 points, 4 rebounds, Game 7, the Western Conference Finals. I mean, I feel like we're not being that hard on the guy, are we, Bruce? I feel like this is just warranted criticism.
No, I mean, look, as I kind of alluded to a few minutes ago, Sam Presti has been stockpiling assets while managing to win big at the same time. But if he wants to return to the top of the hoop world, it's time to cash in some of those assets and make a major push to get Giannis, because Holmgren is now officially Wemby's bitch, okay? Chet doesn't have the fortitude to stand up to Victor, but Giannis does, okay? Mm-hmm. At least for 2 or 3 more seasons. Do the deal, Sam. You can afford it, and by offloading Holmgren's salary, you can afford Giannis. And why do you need 9,700 first-round draft picks if you have a chance to take yourselves right back up to the top of the heap? And Giannis is one of the only guys I can even think of that might be available that could even come close to challenging Wemby on any meaningful level, because it ain't Chet Holmgren.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bruce. I agree 100% with your take on that. Worldy, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that, on what Bruce is saying here.
Well, here's the thing. We talk about, where Chet Holmgren's going to wind up. Well, if the Thunder are so eager to get rid of him, and his salary, by the way, is going to be about average $47 million a year for the next 5 years. In a couple of years from now, it's going to reach the $50 million range. Mm-hmm. Why are the Bucks going to be interested in taking that on after what they saw? So it's great if they can make a deal and maybe part with Holmgren, because clearly his reputation took a real hit in Game 7, just a really abysmal performance. And, he's a young guy. We know he's a young guy. He's only a few years in the league, but he's third-team All-NBA. He was an All-Star. He's got the big salary. Yeah, you got to get the criticism for that kind of performance. It was really unacceptable. And it's not a precedent, guys. Bruce, remember, it's the first time we saw Magic and Bird play for the title in '84. Magic came away from that series with his reputation really damaged for his performance. He had to come back the next year, played better. They got the win, whatever, back in '85. But, going into that season, after that '84 series, Magic's rep wasn't what it is today. And he took his play cost him a couple of games. So you got to get back and rebound from this. He's young enough to do it, but boy, you got to wonder if he's going to do it in Oklahoma City. I get all the wheeling and dealing we want to do, but who wants to take on Chet Holmgren and that salary based off what we just saw when it mattered most?
Well, how about Chet and 4 number 1 draft picks?
Yeah.
Maybe that might get a little easier to swallow. Yeah, I know you do, but you're taking Giannis off the books, so
But you still got Damian Lillard on the books for $90 million. That's a real problem.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what though? you're going to lose Giannis, then you might as well try and at least get the assets.
Absolutely, no question about it. I guess I'm not disputing whether or not Milwaukee can do it. I'm wondering, if you want to have Chet Holmgren, what we just saw, and give him $47 million a year. I know the assets are appealing, but man, oh man, I know Oklahoma City and the fans probably want him out, but I can't imagine there's a whole lot of teams beating down the door to get a Chet Holmgren.
I'd rather have Chet Holmgren than Tyler Hero as one of the cornerstones coming back in a proposed Miami Heat deal. I'd rather have
play D.
Yeah, he'll play defense, block some shots, and be a big man that obviously plays with the pace of play that this style of game requires in this age of basketball.
I mean, think about this too. We're spent a lot of time talking about it here. We haven't even mentioned SGA, who was outstanding in a losing effort in this series. But up until Game 7, none of this we didn't think about Chet. Chet Holmgren wasn't on the radar as far as his last days in Oklahoma City and what are they going to do with it. He just had such an absolutely abysmal game. A terrible game in Game 7. You put up the numbers. No shots in the second half, just 2 for the game. I mean, it's really just a terrible effort on a guy who's supposed to be one of the best in the league. And in one game, he went from being a big name in this league to one of the trade pieces for Oklahoma City to try and rebound and regroup and get back. It's just an amazing transformation in 48 minutes.
It's a cruel world when you're
Absolutely.
Under the spotlight like that. I mean, it is.
No question.
Maybe if he ends up in a team like Milwaukee, where they're not going to have high expectations, they're not as much talent up front in the East that he would have to contend with. Maybe he could rebuild his confidence and get back to being the guy that we thought he was. Because look, I mean, going up against Victor Wembanyama when Wemby hates your guts, that's a tough assignment for anybody, no matter how good they are.
Yeah. I mean, it's no different in the real world, and we'll move on. But if you're interviewing for a job and you pass the first 4 interviews and you have a final interview with the president or CEO of a company and you completely botch the interview, you're probably not going to get the job. So we all deal with it here in the everyday world here as the average Joe too. I mean, you can crush your first 3 interviews and you got to talk to the hiring manager or the boss, and when the lights are on, if you just don't show up or you're stuttering your words or not really performing in your interview, you're not going to get the job, and they're going to move on to the next candidate. So welcome to the real world, Chet Holmgren. That's all I got to say. All right, now let's go ahead and move on to our 2026 NBA Finals preview as World B's New York Knicks will face off against the San Antonio Spurs. World B, before we dive deeper into things, I just want to know, what are our initial reactions to this matchup now that it is the Spurs and not the Thunder?
Well, before we knew who the opponent was going to be, if I had my choice, it was probably going to be the Spurs. And that's not wishing to go up against San Antonio for 7 games, because that's not going to be a real treat. It should be a really entertaining series. But I saw how they played in a couple of those games. They played them obviously 3 times when you include the NBA Cup. And in 2 of those games, they really lit it up offensively. And in the NBA Cup Finals, they really pushed San Antonio around on the offensive glass and everything. So I like of having their chances, their better chances of winning a championship. I thought the Spurs were a better matchup for them on the surface. And maybe that's just because I really wasn't confident about their chance against Oklahoma City. But that was my initial reaction. Before it was decided, I would say, based on what we saw the Knicks do to the Spurs at times during their season series, I was kind of hoping that maybe the Spurs would be the team.
Now, Bruce, my question to you is this. World B alluded to it. In the NBA Cup championship game in Las Vegas, World B is absolutely right. The Thunder or the Knicks did push around the Spurs in that game. How much of that is fuel for Wemby's fire? Obviously, there was that Chet thing that was kind of dangling over his head of I got to make sure I expose Chet. Is he going to try to expose the Knicks now and remember that NBA Cup Finals? Maybe it's just an added chip on his shoulder?
I would think so. I mean, look, I think he's going to get a lot of OG Anunoby guarding him, trying to push him off of his spots. And, a guy like OG is strong enough and, has enough, physical presence to really kind of make it uncomfortable for him to set up, in his sweet spots. So look, Wemby is going to amaze us and dazzle us, even if he has a routine game, because he's going to do 2 or 3 things during the course of the game where you just kind of mouth is like, I can't believe he did that. But my initial reaction on this series, it looks like a virtual toss-up to me. It really does. I mean, if you look through all of the playoff stats as far as team stats, both on offense and on defense, every team stat is super close between these two teams. And both teams are playing their best ball at the right time. I mean, I remember covering the 1999 finals between these two teams, and the Spurs just absolutely hammered the Knicks. I mean, Tim Duncan took home his first Larry O'Brien. David Robinson got his first chip as well. That one went 5 games, all right? But this one's going to go at least 6 and probably 7. And I believe it is so evenly matched. I mean, I have the Spurs in 7 winning on their home court. But if Game 7 were in New York instead, I'd pick the Knicks in 7. That's how close I think this matchup is. It's going to be a classic. I can't wait.
Well, B, what's your thoughts on the overall series and your predictions for how it all play out?
Well, the biggest question is the same question as Bruce kind of alluded to. What do the Knicks do with Wemby? I mean, how are they going to, not just on defense, how are they going to defend him? It's how are they going to, how is their offense going to work with Wemby patrolling the area? We know how much ground he can cover, and it's easy to say, well, we'll just hit they'll depend on the 3-point shot, which has been working like crazy. So many guys, we mentioned last week how many guys are just lighting it up for the Knicks in this playoffs run from the perimeter. But, it's not as easy as that, because what happens when you take that step in? What happens if you even think about the paint? So I'm sure the one thing that has the advantage for the Knicks, or one thing they have going for them, I don't know if it's an advantage yet, but the way they transform Karl Anthony Towns offensively, working from the top of the key, kind of running the passing game through him, putting the ball in his hands at the top of the key, looking to see how things develop. He's been, we were all gambling, whatever, bet the over on Cat assists every playoff game. We'd be all rich right now because he topped every over-under assist total he's had in this playoffs, it seems like. So it's really been amazing here. That's going to be another option, another part of the game that Mitch Johnson and the Spurs have to figure out defense. They didn't see that in any of the matchups. So that's something new they have to look at. How are we going to defend that? It really feels like I know the Spurs are favored coming out of the West, and that's fair. There's no question about it. You beat the Thunder and you beat them in their home court. You deserve to be the favorite going forward. But I'm with Bruce. It feels like a really tight series, and I feel more comfortable with the Knicks' home court advantage maybe than the Spurs necessarily, playing at home. I feel like the Knicks' chances at maybe stealing a game in San Antonio before I think about the Spurs being able to win one at MSG. Not that it can't be done, but if you're asking me which I feel more comfortable about, I go with the Knicks. They have to win one if they're going to win the series. So I like their option, their ability to win, a game in San Antonio.
So how many games you got for the series, and who's your
Knicks in 3? Isn't it always Knicks in 3?
Of course, I forgot. Thanks for reminding me.
Are we doing our predictions now? Is that how we want to do it?
Well, Bruce unveiled his, so go ahead.
I think the Knicks are going to win in 6. I think they're going to take a game in San Antonio at some point, and then I think they're going to close it out at the Garden in what should be a raucous crowd, and I think they'll close it out.
All right, and I've got the Spurs in 6. I just think the perimeter defense is going to be too much for the Knicks perimeter scoring offensively. Not that the Knicks can't defend themselves, but I think Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, I think he could be up there as finals MVP as soon as this year. My finals MVP would be Wemby, of course. I think if the Spurs win, Wemby's obviously going to be the one that has a major factor in that, but Dylan Harper's right behind him here. So keep an eye on Dylan Harper. He's been closing out games, having big pivotal moments. Bruce, you mentioned Julian Champagnie well familiar with Madison Square Garden. And one other fun fact I have for you guys here, Jeremy Shohan. This guy is going to receive an NBA championship ring no matter who wins the championship this year, because up until February 13th, Shohan was a San Antonio Spur, but then he was bought out and he immediately signed with the Knicks. So I don't expect many minutes from Shohan to play at all, if any. I don't think he's seen the floor much at all. But I'd be shocked if Mike Brown and his coaching staff aren't picking his brain for intel on the Spurs players, plays, and even tendencies as they continue to prepare for this series. So it's interesting that Shohan has such a recent familiarity with the Spurs group.
And by the way, we're talking about when it comes to this matchup, the Knicks in the regular season met up with the Spurs when the Spurs were at their best. Remember, they won 11 in a row when they came to MSG in March, I believe, and the Knicks blew them out. And, they ended that streak. Now, it was bound to end, I get. But my point is, they faced San Antonio. I know San Antonio is playing about as well as you could ask them to play, at least defensively right now. But they've also seen San Antonio at their best during the regular season with an 11-game win streak, and they came to the Garden, and Wemby had his numbers, but they still blew him out. So
114 to 89 in that one.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. Now the flip side is the other regular season game, the Spurs put 134 on them on the Knicks. So it goes both ways. I get it, but I don't think the Knicks. There's any reason for the Knicks to fear the Spurs in this matchup, unlike say 99, all those years ago when San Antonio was clearly the better team and the Knicks were just not happy to be there, but getting there was the accomplishment. Now for the Knicks, it's not just getting there anymore. They have to pull it off and get a win.
Now, one follow-up I had here, Bruce, for World B. You didn't say who your finals MVP would be, and I got to know since you're picking the Knicks. Brunson?
Well, if the Knicks are going to win this thing, you got to imagine Jalen Brunson's going to be a major factor. So If the Knicks win it, it's going to be Jalen Brunson winning the MVP.
I didn't know if it could be possibly an OG Anunoby, who's obviously going to have to do a job on Wemby throughout this series, that he could, maybe squeak that one out.
Just be happy I didn't pick Deuce McBride for the MVP, okay?
Okay. Knicks in 3, Deuce McBride.
There you go. That's my prediction.
So we're going to talk about game one, what we think might happen, like right out of the box?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, the Knicks had 8 days off going into game one against Cleveland. They're going to have 8 days off going into this game one against the Spurs as well. Now, in that first game against Cleveland, the Knicks dug themselves a hole, and it required like a miraculous fourth quarter rally before they eventually took that game. That was after an 8-day layoff. So with another 8-day layoff, the Knicks cannot repeat that slow start like they had against, Cleveland against the Spurs, because they're not going to be able to erase a 22-point deficit against Wemby and company on the road. That would be a little bit too much to ask. And, when I did another podcast this afternoon with our buddy Aaron Tobin Hess, who does a podcast for Believe, he asked me, what do I think the key matchup is going to be? And I think I surprised him a little bit, because I said, I think the key matchup is going to be Jalen Brunson versus those waves of perimeter defenders who are going to be after him for 48 minutes, as Ross alluded a few minutes ago in his comment. Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, they're going to play physical. And if they can do to Brunson what they did to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the Western Conference Finals, they may be able to cut off the head of the snake. And if they succeed, that means that Karl Anthony Towns, Mikal Bridges, and Josh Hart are going to have to do much more playmaking and facilitating, which I think could really affect the Knicks' offensive rhythm, because their rhythm is ideal right now, okay? But any kind of disruption to the head of that snake, that Jalen Brunson, could really have a negative effect on the Knicks' flow. So we're really going to have to see, how both of these teams come out of the gate. I would expect the Knicks to have a little bit of rust, but they should be able to shake it off, sometime in the second quarter, I would think.
Yeah, great points there, Bruce. World V, what's your thoughts on game one?
Well, there's every reason to wonder, just how fresh the Knicks are going to, how well they're going to play. Are they going to be rusty, like as Bruce mentioned, game one of the conference finals? It's absolutely a fair question. The only reason I would say maybe not to expect a similar type of slow start by the Knicks is because you get to it's 8 days off. We all get that. But now you're in the finals. It's a little bit different than the conference finals, obviously. There's a lot of buildup. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of, your energy is up for this. So maybe you won't be as, I don't want to say lethargic or whatever, but slow coming out of the gate like you would be in the conference final, like they were in the conference finals, I should say. You're not playing a team that you've seen all season like Cleveland, and you've been to the conference finals. They were there the year before. So maybe it's not as this build up here, this game one gets your energy, gets your juices going a little bit more, and that helps you shake off the rust of a long layoff. Or maybe that's just me wishful thinking. I don't know. That's my hope. I think that's possible. I agree with you guys. Jalen Brunson is going to be the key, whether they can stop him, whether those defenders can really do damage on him. I will say this, Jalen Brunson, in the conference finals and the previous round, didn't have the greatest perimeter shooting performances. He struggled for a lot of the playoffs, or through stretches of the playoffs, shooting from the perimeter, but he still had an impact because there were other guys hitting threes. Karl Anthony Towns hitting threes, Josh Hart obviously hitting threes. Never mind the bench, Landry Shamet was unbelievable. Almost 80% of his threes in the series. So they have enough guys to get. He can be a playmaker. He doesn't have to shoot the ball all the time. I think the other guys are going to have to hit shots if he's not. That's for sure. But I don't think it's vital that he be a 30, 35 point a game guy if the other guys are doing their job as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the depth there, World B, because I think in game one on Wednesday night, the Spurs are going to absolutely set the tone, run away with this one. When I say run away, they'll probably win by like 8 or 9 points. It's not going to come down to the final 1 or 2 possessions of the game, in my opinion. However, with that said, we've talked about it all playoffs long with this Knicks team. One of the biggest strengths, as you just mentioned, is their depth. So this is a team that's going to be able to make adjustments. Mike Brown, really great at making adjustments, getting other guys involved out there on the court. So I think we see a very different Knicks team in game 2. But game 1, I think, belongs to San Antonio. I think they're really going to set the tone in that one. But I think, New York is more than capable of coming out in game 2 and delivering a blow themselves, too. Sending the series back to Madison Square Garden for game 3, all tied up 1-1. And I think a lot of credit will go to their depth when it comes to that. Now, moving on here, let's go ahead and talk about the NBA, who just passed a new lottery system. It's called the 3-2-1 lottery as part of their new anti-tanking reform. This is a new rule that will take effect in the 2027 draft and lasts through at least the 2029 draft. So it expands the lottery to 16 teams from the traditional 14 that we had, and implements a regulation zone that penalizes the 3 worst teams in the league with significantly lower odds for the number 1 overall pick. So teams 4 through 10 with the worst records, or the worst records 4 through 10 will have an 8.1% chance of the number 1 overall pick, which is the highest odds available now. The 3 worst teams in the league legitimately have the same odds at the number 1 overall pick as the 4 play-in teams that fail to make the playoffs, which is a 5.4% chance. And the number 8 seeds, which will be the losers of the 7th, 8th play-in games, will just have a 2.7% chance to secure that top spot in the draft. So additionally to all that, fellas, the bottom 3 teams cannot fall lower than the 12th pick, while all other teams can drop as far as the 16th pick, which would be quite a drop for those teams falling in the 4 through 10 range. But lastly, no team is allowed to win the number 1 overall pick in consecutive years, which is a huge change. And nor can a team land a top 5 pick in 3 consecutive drafts. And I think the important part here is that there's this restriction on the top 5 pick in 3 consecutive drafts even applies to teams who acquire another franchise's pick. So Bruce, going back to OKC's cabinet of first-round picks, that could play a major factor for them in the future. What's your overall thoughts on this new rule Adam Silver and company, carried out?
I mean, the NBA is addressing a real issue here, but they're only committing to it for a 3-year test, okay? I think this has a chance of solving the problem, but there are always unintended consequences. So finishing in the bottom 3 gives teams a worse chance than the teams with the 4th through 10th worst records, as you explained. My concern here is that some of the teams that finish in the bottom three are legitimately bad teams that didn't finish that low because of tanking. They finished that low because they're terrible teams. So with teams fighting to stay out of the bottom three, those that end up there really do suck and deserve to draft higher. This is no panacea. And like I said, I could see, this blowing up on some teams that are going to get screwed. Okay. But I do applaud the league for trying to fix it. And they've only committed to it for 3 years. So, they're going to give it a chance. And something tells me in 3 years from now, we'll be talking about the new NBA draft lottery rules.
Yeah. World B, your thoughts?
I agree with Bruce. I think, something had to be done. We think we all agree that something had to be done because the tanking that went on, it wasn't even, the teams weren't even trying to hide it at this point. And that was it's bad for the league. It's bad for fans who spend a lot of money to go to these games and they're stuck watching, G League teams, G League lineups out there opposed as NBA teams. So something had to be done. I do also agree with Bruce. This is a real problem. This is going to be a real detriment to small market teams that don't have the ability, say like a Charlotte Hornets, to go through free agency and grab, players that they want, be a player in the free agency mix. They have to build through the draft. They have to pick right, but they have to build through the draft. And now you're penalizing markets like this to try and build. This is how they get better. This is how these teams do well. And now it's going to be they're going to take a hit for a while, at least for a few years, potentially. So that's where the problem lies. I don't know the solution yet, but we'll see how it is going forward. But yeah, there's some pluses, but there's definitely, for me, a lot of minuses.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Charlotte Hornets. I think they're a great example, will be, because one thing that we haven't mentioned yet with kind of the backfires of teams trying their hardest, but then there could be unfortunate injuries. Obviously, I'm not rooting for this at all, but the team like the Charlotte Hornets lose LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller to unforeseen injuries for a season. They're out the whole year. Now they can't get talent to acquire for the future, and they're going to be penalized because they had some really unfortunate luck with their star players, going out due to injury. Like that's what's really going to, I think upset me and some of these younger franchises that are trying to build the right way. Charlotte's been one of the teams that has gone about it the right way. And if they get penalized because of some unforeseen injuries to their star players and they're in that bottom three, I think that's just going to be a bad look for the NBA.
And one of the problems, too, is you mentioned, we keep harping on Charlotte or whatever, but they're a great example. You say a small market team that has to build with all, we saw what they did with all these young guys. Once they got healthy, they drafted right. They got some good players. They really, teams like this only get to shoot in free agency, only get to be a player, and not even a major player, but just a player in free agency very, very, few times over a course of, say, a 5-year period. Maybe you get one shot, you get the cap space, and then you got to do it right. That in the Hornets case, like they whiffed on Gordon Hayward. That was their big free agency acquisition. Yeah. It was a sign and trade, but we know they gave him the big bucks there, and it turned out to be a disaster. Before that, they went out and got Lance Stevenson. That was a big free agent signing, and that was an even bigger disaster. So, it really hamstrings these teams that have to do it through the draft and building young guys, and then they have to re-sign those players. That's where they spend their money. It's not going out and trying to find a way to get Giannis to come to Charlotte or Chet Holmgren, take his salary on or whatever. They have to pay the guys they have now, and they have to make sure they're right. Now you're really, potentially putting them under, behind the 8 ball.
Hey, I like that destination for Chet. We're back on him, but him on the Hornets would be nice.
Well, they have the rim protector. Moussa Diabate does just fine there. They do just fine. They don't need to spend $50 million on the guys that get you 2 shots when it counts most.
Okay. Shots fired. All right.
On the numbers he puts up are impressive, and probably puts him in a better spot than Moussa Diabate. But at the end of the day, we still have 2 shots in Game 7.
Yep. All right. Well, now it's time for final thoughts.
Okay. Mitchell Robinson broke his right pinky finger and he had surgery, but he's going to play in Game 1 of the NBA Finals. Now, normally, a broken pinky finger on a shooter's shooting hand might cause problems with that shooting motion mechanics and reduce his chances of being effective, especially at the free throw line, since he rarely shoots anything other than an alley-oop or a follow-up dunk when he grabs an offensive rebound. But in Big Mitch's case, a broken pinky on a shooting hand might actually help, since his mechanics don't really exist anyway. He's a 30% free throw shooter in the playoffs, which is truly awful. If he has to kind of adjust his shooting motion with the pinky issue, it's conceivable he could actually improve his free throw percentage, because, I mean, it's hard to imagine it being any worse.
Yeah, great point there, Bruce. I mean, this could maybe help him or make him not want to shoot, any shots outside the paint. And we know he can still finish around the basket with a broken pinky. So fair points. Good things to ponder as we head into the NBA Finals. Will be.
Just to give a shout out to Rick Adelman, who passed away on Monday at the age of 79. Recent fans remember him as being the head coach of the Sacramento Kings during the best period of their franchise history back in 25 years ago, back in 2000, 99 to 2000 and beyond, when they really challenged the Lakers for NBA West championship. But he was outstanding. Had over 1,000 wins as a head coach. Took the Portland Trailblazers to 2 NBA Finals. No shame to lose to Michael Jordan and Isaiah Thomas back then. That was just what the result was. They had some great teams there. He's in the Hall of Fame, and deservedly so. It was, he was part of in Sacramento. I hope to really, give him his props there, because he was he's probably the best coach that the Kings have ever had, at least since they moved to Sacramento. So just a shout out to Rick Adelman, who was an outstanding coach, a Hall of Fame coach, and really was a leader behind one of the great periods we've had in NBA history, when the Kings were, for a good half decade to a decade, one of the most exciting teams in the league.
And he's the father of Denver Nuggets head coach David Adelman.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. And he also played 8 seasons as an NBA player throughout his career too. So our thoughts and prayers go out to Coach Adelman's family and friends during this difficult time. And I know that his corner offense is also something I'll remember, along with his time with the Sacramento Kings. And that was kind of what I was going to finish with, World B. But I can talk about the Kings a little bit real quickly, because the Kings, boy, are they well represented in this NBA Finals. Their coach, Mike Brown, is leading the charge in New York. Their point guard that they let go is the starting point guard for the Spurs. And, oh, by the way, if we want to take this back to last year's Finals, Tyrese Halliburton, another point guard they let go, was in the Finals. So I don't know, maybe next year, Bruce, Zach LaVine's team, are they going to the Finals?
Yeah, hopefully he can get some good courtside tickets, because that's as close as he's going to get.
And with that will do it for this edition of the 48 Minutes Podcast on Believe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with you next week to be sure you're up to date in 48 on all things around the association. Take care, everybody.